Hello viewers, today I'm going to read through an article from CNN called "He Got Out of Gaza, but Gaza Did Not Get Out of Him. Israeli Soldiers Returning from War Struggle with Trauma and Suicide." Why are we looking at this article today? Well, I think it's a good example of the freakish framing that Western media is willing to adopt in an attempt to humanize perpetrators of a genocide, which is one facet of the normalization of said genocide. As we read, I want to pay attention to the language, the framing, the active and passive voice as these events are described, as the Gaza genocide is covered by CNN from the Israeli soldier perspective, from the apparently sad Israeli soldier perspective. There's some pretty horrific shit that gets cited in this article. I'll let you know before I get to that part. A 40-year-old father of four, Eliran Mizrahi, deployed to Gaza after the deadly Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. The Israeli military reservist returned a different person, traumatized by what he had witnessed in the war against Hamas in the Strip. 6 months after he was first sent to fight, he was struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder back at home. Before he was due to redeploy, he took his own life. He got out of Gaza, but Gaza did not get out of him, and he died after it because of the post-trauma, his mother, Jenny Mizrahi, said. The Israeli military has said it is providing care for thousands of soldiers who are suffering from PTSD or mental illnesses caused by trauma during the war. It is unclear how many have taken their own lives, as the IDF has not provided an official figure. So already there are some small cues as to the perspective that this is being framed from. This soldier was traumatized by what he witnessed. Some form of harm was enacted upon him by something he saw but had no direct participation in, apparently. We don't know what was witnessed at this point, and we'll see what it is, but just keep that framing in mind. 1 year on, Israel's war in Gaza has killed more than 42,000 people, according to the health ministry in the Strip, with the United Nations reporting that most of the dead are women and children. The war, launched after Hamas killed 1,200 people and took more than 250 hostages, is already Israel's longest since the Jewish state was established. And as it now expands to Lebanon, some soldiers say they dread being drafted into yet another conflict. So notice, there's no mention of who is actually being killed, just that a lot of people are being killed in this one place, and some participants in that vague process are getting sad about it. It's also obviously being labeled a war in Western media. You will rarely find it being called anything other than that or conflict. But I, along with a bunch of Holocaust survivors and scholars and members of human rights organizations and academics and healthcare workers operating in Gaza, and really anyone that's been to Gaza, and the International Court of Justice, which determined that South Africa's case accusing Israel of genocide was plausible, issuing provisional measures in order to prevent this plausible genocide, which Israel has failed to adhere to in any meaningful sense. This group of people and organizations is willing to call this a genocide. And then on the other hand, you have the Israeli state and certain random divorced internet celebrities. Who's to say which side is correct? But regardless of how you feel, while I'm going to read the CNN article as it calls it a war, it is, from my perspective and others, a genocide. A lot of us are very scared of getting drafted again into a war in Lebanon, an IDF medic who served 4 months in Gaza told CNN. A lot of us don't trust the government right now. Israeli authorities, with rare exceptions, have closed off Gaza to foreign journalists unless under IDF escort, making it difficult to capture the full extent of Palestinian suffering or the experiences of soldiers there. Israeli soldiers who fought in the enclave told CNN they witnessed horrors the outside world can never truly comprehend. Their accounts offer a rare glimpse into the brutality of what critics have called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's forever war, and the intangible toll it takes on the soldiers who participate. So we're already off to a very odd start. Glimpses into the experiences of Israeli soldiers have been offered quite a bit by the soldiers themselves when they post photos and videos of themselves on social media, dancing to music as they destroy buildings, rifling through and defiling the homes that they have damaged or destroyed, and playing with the children's toys, or rifling through their clothing to wear women's underwear. Getting a look into the experience of Israeli soldiers is actually so not rare that there's a document of over 10,000 Israeli war crimes that have been committed on camera, and the reason we have these is because they post them on social media. Al Jazeera recently released an excellent documentary on this subject. I would recommend watching that, but even if this weren't the case, if nobody had phones there and they weren't posting this stuff, yes, it is difficult to get information from on the ground because Israel also keeps assassinating journalists, specifically targeting journalists and their entire families and killing all of them. In this genocide, we've seen the most journalists killed in a conflict in modern history, and we do have so much footage of these atrocities, both from the victims and from the perpetrators. So just imagine how much worse things are are on the ground, given that Israel is so murderously restricting the people's ability to cover what's happening, to tell the truth about this. For many soldiers, the war in Gaza is a fight for Israel's survival and must be won by any means. Yeah, I mean, that kind of goes without saying, right? What they mean by any means is murdering a bunch of children, blowing up hospitals, destroying everything in sight. That's what that means. But the battle is also taking a mental toll that, due to stigma, is largely hidden from view. Interviews with Israeli soldiers, a medic, and the family of Mizrahi, the reservist who took his own life, provide a window into the psychological burden that the war is casting on Israeli society. Sorry, but just if you're aware of what's going on, this is just, do Nazi soldiers need better help? Could our genocide be more efficient if we just went for a morning walk every day to improve our mental health? Mizrahi deployed to Gaza on October 8th last year and was tasked with driving a D9 bulldozer, a 62-ton armored vehicle that can withstand bullets and explosives. He was a civilian for most of his life, working as a manager at an Israeli construction company. After witnessing the massacres committed by Hamas, he felt the need to fight, Jenny told CNN. The reservist spent 186 days in the enclave until he sustained injuries to his knee, followed by hearing damage in February when an RPG struck his vehicle. He was pulled out of Gaza for treatment and in April was diagnosed with PTSD, receiving weekly talk therapy. His treatment did not help. They didn't know how to treat the soldiers. Jenny, who lives in the Israeli Ma'ale Adumim settlement in the occupied West Bank, said, "Oh, that's great. So not only did they find a colonizing murderer's wife, they found a criminal colonizing murderer's wife, because that's illegal. Not that the state of Israel is legitimate by any means, but the West Bank settlements are, illegal under international law. These are the most extreme proponents of Palestinian genocide that you can find." When Mizrahi was on leave, he suffered from bouts of anger, sweating, insomnia, and social withdrawal, his family said. He told his family that only those who were in Gaza with him could understand what he was going through. He always says, "No one will understand what I saw," his sister told CNN. Jenny wondered if her son killed someone and couldn't handle it. Once again, this is littered with this passive observational voice. No one will understand what I saw. Okay, what would you do, though? That's, I think, the important part, that IDF soldiers, every single one of them, top to bottom, is complicit in this genocide machine. It's just a matter of how you chose to contribute. Mizrahi drove the bulldozers, and what does that mean? Well, we'll see. Okay, so in this article, the very next thing you see is an image of the Shujaya neighborhood completely destroyed. Absolutely stunning, the contrast here. Some guys are really sad. Unrelated photo, this is what they did. This is the results of their actions. This child walking through the destroyed remains of his neighborhood. He's in the photo, but we didn't reach out to him for comment. It's just whiplash, dude. It's fucking insane. He saw a lot of people die. Maybe he even killed someone. But we don't teach our children to do things like this. So when he did this, something like this, maybe it was a shock for him. So when she says we don't teach our children to do things like this, if she's referring to killing Palestinians, then that's not exactly true. Later in this same article, they cite a statistic that a year after the October 7th attack, only 6% of Israelis think the war in Gaza should be stopped due to the great cost in human life. The vast majority of Israelis do not give a fuck about dead Palestinians. So why is this person acting like volunteering for the military to go kill them is any form of contradiction whatsoever? It's not. It's built into the society. Guy Zakin, Mizrahi's friend and co-driver of the bulldozer, provided further insight into their experience in Gaza. "We saw very, very, very difficult things," Zakin told CNN. "Things that are difficult to accept." This is where things get pretty disturbing, so content warning for violence, death, and gore. The former soldier has spoken publicly about the psychological trauma endured by Israeli troops in Gaza. In a testimony to the Knesset, Israel's parliament, in June, Zakin said that on many occasions soldiers had to run over terrorists, dead and alive, in the hundreds. "Everything squirts out," he added. Zakin says he can no longer eat meat, as it reminds him of the gruesome scenes he witnessed from his bulldozer in Gaza, and struggles to sleep at night, the sound of explosions ringing in his head. "When you see a lot of meat outside and blood, both ours and theirs," in quotes, Hamas, "then it really affects you when you eat," he told CNN, referring to bodies as meat. So this is the most freakish thing I've ever read in an article. What he's describing here is torture and execution. There's a plethora of evidence, of footage and images of the results of what he's talking about. Perhaps one of the more famous cases of the flattened remains of a Palestinian man run over alive by one of these Israeli bulldozers. And in the images, you can see that his hands are still zip-tied. There was also, of course, Rachel Corrie, the American peace activist, who, while protesting the destruction of buildings in Gaza by the IDF, was killed by a soldier driving one of these same bulldozers. Some Israelis celebrate on this day every year by making pancakes with Rachel Corrie's face painted painted into them. These are indescribable atrocities, and yet this article is centering the trauma of the perpetrator. Not just the trauma, but how it affects his appetite. Like, what the fuck is this, man? And again, with the totally passive language. These are gruesome scenes that he witnessed from his bulldozer. He's just sitting on the bulldozer and it's doing it on its own. It happened and the bulldozer is what did it, and he watched it from atop the bulldozer as it was doing it, but it was something he witnessed. Also, I want to note the article's addition of Hamas in parentheses there. I don't know if the person said this or if CNN added it. This is the lie that the terrorist state of Israel must perpetuate, because we know who's dying. It's not Hamas, it's Palestinian civilians. It's overwhelmingly women and children. He maintains that the vast majority of those he encountered were terrorists. The civilians we saw, we stopped and brought them water to drink, and we let them eat from our food, he recalled, adding that even in such situations, Hamas fighters would shoot them. Really? Attacking people that are just trying to get some food? Come on, guys. That's really bad. That's really Hamas of them.
Eyewitnesses on the scene have told us that Israeli tanks as well as drones opened fire on this crowd.
So there is no such thing as citizens, he said, referring to the ability of Hamas fighters to blend with civilians. This is terrorism. Okay, so now we have a little insight as to why the Hamas label was added. It's because there's no citizens, right? Another genocidal lie that they have to tell themselves, that their leadership tells them in order to continue with this project. When soldiers do encounter civilians, however, many face a moral dilemma, according to the IDF medic who spoke to CNN anonymously. There was a very strong collective attitude of distrust among Israeli soldiers toward the Palestinians in Gaza, especially at the outset of the war, the medic said. There was a notion that Gazans, including civilians, are bad, that they support Hamas, that they help Hamas, that they were hiding ammunition, the medic said. In the field, however, some of these attitudes changed. When you actually see Gazan civilians in front of your eyes, they said, I don't believe this for a single moment, but even if it were true, whatever attitudes may have changed in the minds of these soldiers have resulted in what? Nothing. Nothing has functionally changed. They are still committing genocide. They are still posting about it on TikTok. Our country is still unconditionally supporting it, and the only reason this line is being printed into a major publication is to, in some small ways, obfuscate all of those facts. The IDF has said that it does all it can to minimize civilian casualties in Gaza, including by sending text messages, making phone calls, and dropping evacuation leaflets to warn civilians ahead of attacks. Despite this, civilians in Gaza have been repeatedly killed in large numbers, including when sheltering in areas the military itself has designated as safe zones. So look how these two things are presented, right? The IDF said this. The evidence shows that they're actually lying and they're actually murdering a lot of people in some of the most heinous ways possible. Those are just two perspectives for you, the reader, to consider. Anytime you see, well, here's what the IDF said, it takes one search to find out that all of this is a lie. The mental health toll in Gaza is likely to be enormous. Relief groups and the UN have repeatedly highlighted the catastrophic mental health consequences of the war on civilians in Gaza, many of whom had already been scarred by a 17-year blockade and several wars with Israel. In an August report, the UN said the experiences of Gazans defy traditional biomedical definitions of PTSD, given that there is no post in Gaza's context. I mean, this line is just chilling, an outright admission that the suffering will never end, that this is genocide. This point just gets dropped in the article, and then it's immediately followed by turning back to the mental health of the person doing this, right? The IDF soldier. After Mizrahi took his own life, videos and photos surfaced on social media of the reservist bulldozing homes and buildings in Gaza and posing in front of vandalized structures. Some of the images, which were purportedly posted on his now removed social media accounts, appeared in a documentary that he was interviewed for on Israel's Channel 13. His sister, Shur, says she saw a lot of comments on social media accusing Mizrahi of being a murderer, cursing at him, and replying with unpleasant emojis. It was hard, she said, adding that she tried her best to overlook it. I know he had a good heart. Oh my god, dude. Unpleasant emojis. That's what we're talking about? That's what was hard to you. When you say your brother had a good heart, you're wrong. He didn't, and neither do you. Because what the fuck are you talking about? He posted war crimes. They don't list the documentary by name, they don't link to it, but all it takes is one search, and yeah, this guy was a freak. He was posting the same shit that makes it into all these documentaries of war crimes. Clearing dead people with debris. Aaron Bregman, a political scientist at King's College London who served in the Israeli army for 6 years, including during the 1982 Lebanon War, said the Gaza war is unlike any other fought by Israel. It's very long, he said, and it is urban, which means soldiers fight among many people. The vast majority of them are civilians. Bulldozer operators are among those who are most directly exposed to the war's brutality, Bregman said. What they see is dead people, and they clear them along with the debris. They go over them. Again, this violence is framed as somehow being imposed onto these soldiers, these terrorists. They were exposed to the brutality. They see dead people, treated completely like the laws of nature, like an inevitable reality. For many, the transition from the battlefield back to civilian life can be overwhelming, especially after urban warfare that involves the deaths of women and children. Sorry, let's get a rewrite on that. For many, taking a break from committing genocide can be overwhelming, especially after entering into a concentration camp to repeatedly murder women and children. That's what's actually happening, but it's here summarized as a really tough time for these guys. How can you put your children to bed when, you saw children killed in Gaza? You saw it. You saw it. It just happened. I saw it. I don't know who did that. Despite Mizrahi's PTSD, his family said he agreed to return to Gaza when he was called up again. 2 days before he was meant to redeploy, he killed himself. In her home, Jenny has dedicated a room to memorialize her late son, with photos from his childhood and working in construction. Among the objects his mother has kept was the cap Mizrahi was wearing when he shot himself in the head, the bullet holes clearly visible. It then shows an image of Mizrahi as a child. This is obviously meant to invoke some sort of sympathy for this person, but all I see when I look at this picture is a reflection of one of the tens of thousands of children that this person grew up to participate in killing. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that 10 soldiers took their own lives between October 7th and May 11th, according to military data obtained by the newspaper. Asked by CNN about the number of suicides in the IDF since the war, Uzi Becker, a psychologist and commander of the IDF's Combat Response Unit, said the medical corps is not allowed to provide a figure, and the military sees the suicide rate as largely unchanged. The suicide rate in the army is more or less stable in the last 5 or 6 years, Becker said, noting that it has in fact been falling over the past 10 years. Even if the number of suicides is higher, he said, the ratio so far is quite the same from the previous year because we have more soldiers. It doesn't mean that there's a trend of more suicide, Becker told CNN. So I don't believe this for a moment because, well, they don't show the statistics and it is within the IDF's interest to maintain a facade of strength. And no, these soldiers are not strong. They are notoriously weak, actually, incompetent pussies who hide behind screens and murder children from afar with Xbox controllers. But if evidence did come out that they actually were killing themselves in droves, that would at least be a sign that some of them do have enough of a conscience to see that the actions they've taken in Gaza are deserving of punishment in some form. And on the inverse, if it is true, if the IDF soldier suicide rate hasn't changed, I feel like that's a grim sign. A sign that despite the total murderous rampage they've gone on since October 7th, their consciences have somehow adjusted to rationalize it. And that's a troubling thought. Becker, the IDF psychologist, said that one of the ways the military helps traumatized troops resume their lives is to try to normalize what they went through, partly by reminding them of the horrors committed on October 7th. This situation is not normal for human beings, Becker said, adding that when soldiers come back from the battlefield with PTSD symptoms, they ask, how do I get back home after what I saw? How do I get to engage with my kids after what I saw? We try to normalize it and to help them remember their values and why did they go there to Gaza. For the tens of thousands of Israelis who volunteered or were called up to fight, the war in Gaza was seen not only as an act of self-defense, but as an existential battle. That notion was touted by top Israeli political and military leaders, as well as Israel's international allies. Yeah, it was a good versus evil, remember? The children of light versus the children of darkness. They were all pretty clear about their intentions from the jump. So here we go again with these monsters having to tell themselves stories, having to remind themselves of the narrative that nothing could ever justify October 7th, but October 7th justifies everything. Anything you did, just remember what happened and all of it's washed away. You're absolved of your sins. Super important to note here that this is the power of spreading misinformation that demonizes not just Palestinians, but Hamas in general. The amount of misinformation that was spread about October 7th, claims of 40 beheaded babies, claims of mass campaigns of sexual assault, all of which were proven false. We can, in this article, see one of the results of such propaganda, which is a direct motivation for them to continue the genocide. These guys are downing themselves, and the IDF's therapists are using debunked New York Times articles to revive them, to keep them going on their killing spree. Netanyahu has described Hamas as the new Nazis, and US President Joe Biden has said that the ancient hatred of Jews endorsed by the Nazis was brought back to life on October 7th. The external threats to their country unified many Israelis, putting on hold domestic political squabbling that had for months divided society. Meanwhile, the suffering of Palestinians has largely been absent from Israeli television screens, which are dominated by news about the hostages in Gaza. After the Hamas attacks, polls showed that most Israelis supported the war in Gaza and did not want their government to halt the fighting, even while negotiating to release the kidnapped hostages. On the one-year anniversary of the October 7th attack, a survey published by the Israel Democracy Institute found that only 6% of Israelis think the war in Gaza should be stopped due to the great cost of human life. This is another unfortunate reality of the situation, is that Israel as a society is sick to its core with dehumanizing anti-Palestinian racism, to where all the political conversations about Netanyahu and internal government affairs are all centered around Israeli society itself and the hostages. The hostages being the ones that the IDF itself keeps killing. The genocide doesn't factor into it in any way. Most of the world has caught on to what's going on here. Most of the world's countries have condemned it. Most of the world's countries have called for a ceasefire. Protests against the genocide are some of the largest we've seen in decades. And still, just 6% give a fuck about the monumental loss of Palestinian life. Some soldiers, however, couldn't rationalize the horrors they had seen. When he returned from Gaza, Mizrahi often told his family that he felt invisible blood coming out of him, his mother said. Shir, his sister, blames the war for her brother's death. Because of the army, because of this war, my brother is not here. Maybe he didn't die from a bullet in combat or an RPG, but he died from an invisible bullet, she added, referring to his psychological pain. This is the lengths to which supporters of this genocide will go to rationalize what happened. They will make ghost stories. Stories about Palestinian ghosts, bullets from an enemy that doesn't exist. The only reason I'm wasting my breath on this story is because of how heinous of an example it is of the willingness of Western media to frame perpetrators of a genocide as victims. The prominent voices in the West do not see Palestinians as human and do not take seriously the violence enacted upon them. The war criminals perpetrating their genocide are given infinitely more sympathy and coverage and airtime than any single Palestinian victim. It's repulsive. It makes me sick to my stomach. I hope it makes you feel the same, and I hope it makes you angry, because it is so profoundly unjust and evil, and I hope you can harness that anger into productive ways like volunteering, donating, and protesting, because that's unfortunately all that we can really do. I've linked below a GoFundMe for someone I met on Instagram, someone that I would call a friend, Ahmed Matar, who's organizing a fundraiser for his brother, Salah, and his family. His wife, Islam, and their 4 children, Sidra, Muhammad, Amir, and Tagreed. I'm just going to go ahead and read the message that Salah wrote. The journey of our youngest, Tagreed, began amidst the chaos of November, during the peak of the assault on Gaza. It was a time of great fear and uncertainty. We found ourselves displaced for the second time, seeking refuge in a shelter where Tagreed came into this world. His birth brought both joy and worry, a tiny beacon of hope amidst the darkness of war. Once, the northern part of Gaza was our home, where the sea breeze carried the scent of olive trees and the laughter of our children echoed through the streets. But the violence of war shattered our peaceful existence, forcing us to flee not once, but 4 times. Each displacement brought new challenges, pushing us further into the unknown. Now, we reside in Rafah, a borderland caught between 2 worlds. Our home is a tent pitched on dusty plains near the Egyptian border. It offers little protection from the harsh realities of life in a war-torn land. Every day is a struggle to find clean water, food, and basic necessities. Diapers for Tagreed are a luxury beyond our means, and we often must ration what little we have. Despite the hardships, we cling to hope for a better future. Your support can make a world of difference for us. With your help, we can evacuate to Egypt, where safety and stability beckon on the horizon. Your donations will also provide essential supplies like food, clothing, and medical care for my family. Furthermore, your contributions will assist us in rebuilding our lives by helping us purchase clothes and other essential items that we lost in our destroyed home in the north of Gaza. Your generosity offers a glimmer of light in the darkness, guiding us towards a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for your kindness and compassion. Together, we can turn our struggles into stories of resilience and hope. That's it for today's video. Let me know what you thought of this, if I should do more article read style videos, and see you on the next one.